She was 25 and completely lost. No direction, no closure. Just one last conversation she could never take back. And a decision that made no sense. She bought a forgotten stone cottage, hidden deep in the mountains, cold, silent, untouched for years, a place people avoided for a reason. They warned her. They said moving in was the fastest way to lose herself completely. But what they didn't know was that behind those walls something wasn't just waiting. It was remembering. And it was about to force her to face the one thing she had been running from since the day her mother died. Before we continue, if stories like this inspire you, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. At 25, Scarlett Monroe wasn't searching for a fresh start. She was trying to outrun a past that refused to let her go. After losing her mother in a sudden hospital tragedy and watching her carefully built life in Boston unravel piece by piece, Scarlett found herself emotionally hollow. Days blurred together. Nights felt heavier. And silence became louder than any noise she had ever known. With nothing left tying her to the city, she made a decision that didn't make sense to anyone else. She bought an abandoned stone cottage hidden deep in the remote hills of Vermont. The cottage stood alone, built from weathered gray stone. Its walls cracked with age, its windows clouded with dust and time. Locals avoided it, whispering about strange sounds echoing through the night's soft knocks, shifting walls, and the unsettling feeling that the house remembered things it should have forgotten. No one stayed long. No one ever tried to fix it. But Scarlett wasn't looking for comfort. She arrived just before dusk, the sky dimming into a cold amber glow. As she stepped toward the cottage, an unnatural stillness settled around her. This wasn't just an old house. It felt like something inside it was waiting. And somehow, without understanding why, Scarlett knew she had just stepped into a story she wouldn't be able to walk away from. The first night inside the stone cottage felt longer than it should have. Scarlett Monroe lay awake on a narrow, creaking bed, staring at the cracked ceiling above her. The silence was unnatural, not peaceful, not comforting. It pressed against her ears, heavy and suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath. She checked her phone. No signal, no messages, no distractions. Just her and the quiet. At some point past midnight, exhaustion finally began to pull her under. Her body relaxed slightly. Her breathing slowed. Knock. Scarlett's eyes snapped open. She didn't move. Another sound followed, softer this time. Knock, knock. It came from somewhere nearby, not outside, not above. Inside the house, Scarlett pushed herself up slowly, her heart already beginning to race. "It's just the wind," she whispered, more to convince herself than anything else. Old houses made noise, wood shifted, pipes groaned. That was normal. This had to be normal. She held her breath, listening. Silence returned. Minutes passed. Nothing else happened. Eventually, she exhaled and lay back down, forcing her eyes closed again. But sleep didn't come easily after that. The next night, it happened again. Scarlett had been more prepared this time, at least mentally. She kept a lamp on, sat upright in bed with a book she wasn't really reading, waiting to see if what she heard the night before had been real. 2:16 a.m. Her eyes flicked to the clock. 2:17. Knock. The sound was clearer now, more defined. Knock, knock, knock. 3 times, slow, even, intentional. Scarlett stood up immediately, her pulse hammering in her chest. This wasn't random noise. This wasn't pipes or wind or settling wood. This was a pattern. She followed the sound, step by cautious step, her bare feet pressing against the cold wooden floor. The knocking echoed faintly, guiding her toward the living room, toward the fireplace. The moment she stepped closer, the sound stopped. Just like that. Gone. Scarlett stared at the stone wall surrounding the fireplace, her breathing shallow. "Hello," she called out, her voice tight. No answer. Of course not. She let out a shaky laugh, rubbing her arms. "You're losing it," she muttered under her breath. "That's all this is." But deep down, she didn't believe that. By the third night, Scarlett wasn't just uneasy. She was waiting. The fear had shifted into something else. Something sharper, more focused. Anticipation. She sat on the worn couch, eyes locked on the fireplace, the room lit only by a dim lamp, casting long shadows across the stone walls. 2:17 a.m. Right on time. Knock? She didn't flinch this time. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same spacing. Scarlett stood slowly, stepping closer, her eyes scanning the uneven surface of the stones. Some were larger than others, some darker, some slightly misaligned, as if they had been placed in a hurry or replaced. Her fingers hovered over the wall. The knocking came again, this time louder. Closer, right behind the stone. Her breath caught. "This isn't possible," she whispered. And yet, her instincts told her otherwise. She pressed her palm against the cold surface. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. But something had changed. She could feel it. The next morning, Scarlett didn't ignore it. She couldn't. Instead of packing her things and leaving like any rational person would, she found herself kneeling in front of the fireplace, studying every inch of the stonework. If the sound was coming from behind the wall, then there had to be space back there. A hollow, a gap, something hidden. She ran her fingers along the cracks between the stones, feeling for anything unusual, any shift, any movement, any imperfection that didn't belong. Most of it felt solid, immovable. Until, there, a slight indentation, barely noticeable. One stone, near the lower right corner of the fireplace, felt different, looser. Not by much, but enough. Scarlett's pulse quickened. No way. She pressed against it. Nothing. She pushed harder. Still nothing. Frustration flickered across her face. She stood up, glancing around the cottage until her eyes landed on a rusted iron poker leaning against the wall. "All right," she muttered, grabbing it. She knelt again and wedged the tip into the narrow gap beside the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. The metal scraped against rock, echoing sharply in the quiet room. Then, a shift. Small, but real. Her breath hitched. She adjusted her grip and pulled harder this time. The stone resisted then slowly, reluctantly. It moved. Dust crumbled from the edges as the piece slid forward, just enough to reveal darkness behind it. Not solid. Not filled. Empty. Scarlett froze, staring at the narrow opening. Cold air seeped out from within, brushing against her face like a whisper from something long forgotten. Her heart pounded louder now, each beat echoing in her ears. This shouldn't be here. But it was, and suddenly everything made sense. The knocking, the timing, the precision. It wasn't random. It was coming from behind the wall. Something, or someone, had been trying to get her attention. For 3 nights straight, Scarlett's hand trembled slightly as she reached toward the gap, brushing away loose debris, widening the opening just enough to see inside. Nothing but darkness greeted her at first. Endless, silent, waiting. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized something that made her chest tighten. There was space back there. More than just a gap. A passage. Hidden. Sealed. Forgotten. Her breath slowed, but her mind raced. This wasn't just a structural flaw. This was intentional. Whoever built this place had hidden something behind these walls, and whatever it was, had been knocking. Scarlett sat back on her heels, staring at the opening, her thoughts spiraling between fear and something far more dangerous, curiosity. Because deep down, beneath the unease and the logic telling her to walk away, there was a feeling she couldn't ignore. A pull. Like this wasn't just something she had found, but something that had been waiting for her to find it. Scarlett didn't open the passage right away. She sat there for several minutes, staring into the narrow gap behind the stone, her mind racing between logic and instinct. Every rational part of her screamed to stop, to seal it back up, to leave the cottage, to pretend she had never found anything at all. But that feeling, that pull, it was stronger now. Stronger than fear. Stronger than reason. Taking a slow breath, Scarlett pushed the loosened stone further aside. With effort, she widened the opening just enough to slip through. Dust filled the air as she stepped into the darkness beyond, her flashlight cutting a thin beam through the void. And then she saw it. A narrow staircase, old, crumbling, carved directly into the foundation beneath the stone cottage. Her pulse quickened. This was never meant to be found, she whispered. Each step creaked under her weight as she descended, the air growing colder with every inch. The temperature drop wasn't normal. It was sharp, unnatural, like stepping into a place untouched by time. At the bottom, the beam of her flashlight revealed a small underground room. A sealed cellar, forgotten, waiting. The space was filled with objects carefully arranged, not abandoned. Wooden crates lined the walls, their surfaces thick with dust but still intact. Shelves held stacks of photographs, bundles of letters tied with fading ribbon, and small personal items placed with quiet intention. This wasn't storage. This was preservation. Scarlett stepped forward slowly, her breath shallow, her heartbeat echoing in the silence. She reached for one of the boxes and lifted the lid. Inside, photographs, black and white. A woman standing in front of the cottage, her expression soft but distant. A young girl beside her, smiling brightly, her hand tightly gripping the woman's dress. Scarlett swallowed. There was something hauntingly familiar about the image, not in appearance, but in feeling. She set the photo aside and picked up a bundle of letters. The paper was fragile, but carefully preserved. Her hands trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the first page. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, and signed at the bottom, Eleanor Whitmore. Scarlett frowned. The name meant nothing to her, yet something about it felt important. She kept reading. At first, the letters seemed ordinary, daily thoughts, observations, mentions of the cottage, the surrounding woods, the passing seasons. But then, the tone changed. The words grew heavier, more urgent. Her eyes moved faster now, scanning line after line. And then she found it, a journal, tucked beneath the letters, bound in worn leather, its edges cracked with age. Scarlett hesitated for only a moment before opening it. The first few entries were calm, almost peaceful. Descriptions of life in the cottage, quiet mornings, firelight, the sound of wind against stone walls. But then, Everything shifted. I should have stopped her. Scarlett froze. Her fingers tightened around the page. She kept reading. The storm came faster than anyone expected. She said she could make it back before nightfall. I told her to wait. I told her it wasn't safe. Scarlett's breath slowed. A chill ran through her chest. But she didn't listen, and I didn't try hard enough to stop her. The words pressed deeper now. Heavy snow, no visibility. They found nothing the next morning. Scarlett's throat tightened. She was out there, alone, and the last thing I said to her was, the sentence trailed off. The ink smeared slightly, as if the writer's hand had trembled. Scarlett turned the page. I never said I was sorry. Silence filled the cellar, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Scarlett sat back slowly, her heart pounding not from fear this time, but from something else entirely, something deeper. Recognition. Because suddenly, this wasn't just Eleanor Whitmore's story. It was hers. Her grip tightened around the journal as memories she had buried began to surface. The hospital room, the harsh fluorescent lights, the argument. The last conversation she had with her mother. Sharp words, frustration, distance. "I'll come back tomorrow," Scarlett had said. But tomorrow never came, and neither did the apology. Her chest tightened painfully. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as if she could push the memory away. But it was too late. The connection had already been made. Line by line, word by word. Eleanor's regret mirrored her own. Two women, two different lives, separated by decades, bound by the same unfinished sentence. "I'm sorry." Scarlett's hands began to shake. This can't be real. But it was. And suddenly, the knocking made sense. It wasn't random. It wasn't just a sound. It was a signal. A message, not from something supernatural, but from something unresolved. Something that had never been allowed to rest. Scarlett looked around the cellar again, her perspective completely changed. This wasn't a place of fear. It was a place of memory, of regret, of words left unsaid. The stone cottage wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by silence. And for the first time since arriving, Scarlett understood why she couldn't leave. Because this place wasn't just showing her the past. It was forcing her to confront her own. Tears blurred her vision as she looked back down at the journal, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't get to say it either. The air felt heavier now. Not threatening, but emotional, almost responsive. Like the house itself had been waiting for this moment. For her to understand. For her to feel it. For her to finally face what she had been running from. Scarlett closed the journal slowly, pressing it against her chest. The fear was gone. In its place was something far more powerful. Truth. Because from that moment on, the stone cottage was no longer just a mystery to solve. It had become something much deeper. A mirror. And what it reflected was a wound Scarlett could no longer ignore. Scarlett didn't leave the cellar right away. She stayed there, sitting on the cold stone floor, the journal resting in her lap, her thoughts unraveling faster than she could contain them. For the first time since arriving at the stone cottage, she wasn't thinking about escape. She was thinking about understanding, because something had shifted, deep inside her. At first, Scarlett had believed she came here by accident. A desperate decision, a random escape, a place to disappear. But now, that explanation no longer felt true. Nothing about this felt random anymore. Not the house, not the hidden cellar, not the journal, not even the knocking at 2:17 a.m. It all felt intentional, as if the cottage hadn't just been waiting, but calling She slowly stood up, brushing the dust from her clothes, and looked around the cellar again. But this time, she wasn't seeing objects. She was seeing emotions. The photographs weren't just images. They were frozen moments of love. The letters weren't just paper. They were attempts to say what had been too hard to say out loud. And the journal. It wasn't just a record of Eleanor Whitmore's life. It was a confession. A living proof of what happens when words are left unspoken for too long. Scarlett swallowed hard. "This place isn't haunted," she whispered. Her voice echoed softly against the stone walls. "It's unfinished." When she climbed back up into the living room, everything looked the same. The cracked walls, the worn furniture, the dim light filtering through dusty windows. But somehow, everything felt different. The fear that had once wrapped around her chest had loosened its grip, because now she understood something she hadn't before. The stone cottage wasn't trapping her. It was revealing her. Over the next few days, Scarlett began to notice things she had missed before. Small details, subtle patterns. Each room carried a different energy, almost like chapters in a story that had never been finished. In the kitchen, she found an old teacup left carefully on a shelf, as if someone had intended to come back for it, but never did. In the bedroom, a worn blanket still rested neatly at the foot of the bed, untouched, preserved, waiting. And near the window, she discovered faint scratches on the wooden frame marks that looked like someone had stood there, day after day, staring out into the distance. Waiting, hoping, regretting. Scarlett ran her fingers over the scratches, her chest tightening again. She was waiting for her to come back. The realization hit her harder than anything else. Eleanor hadn't just lost her daughter. She had lived with the weight of that loss every single day after. Not just grief, but regret. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that settles into your bones. Scarlett stepped back, her breathing uneven now, because suddenly, she saw herself in that same position. Different time, different life. Same wound. She had been doing the exact same thing. Running, avoiding, pretending that distance could somehow erase what had already happened. She left Boston. She stopped answering calls. She buried herself in silence. But none of it worked. Because pain doesn't disappear when you run from it. It just waits, patiently, quietly, until you're forced to face it. Scarlett sank down onto the edge of the couch, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze unfocused. "I thought leaving would make it easier," she murmured. Her voice cracked slightly, but it didn't. The truth settled in slowly but heavily. You can change your location, you can change your routine, you can even change the people around you. But you cannot outrun something that lives inside you. Her eyes drifted toward the fireplace, toward the wall where the knocking had begun. 2:17 a.m., the exact moment her mother had passed away. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The time wasn't random. It was a memory. A moment frozen in her life, the last point where everything could have been different. If only she had said something else. If only she had stayed. If only she had said the words that now echoed endlessly in her mind. "I'm sorry." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, she didn't push them away. She didn't look for distractions. She didn't run. She let them fall. Because for the first time, Scarlett understood something that changed everything. Pain doesn't need to be hidden to disappear. It needs to be seen, felt, accepted. The stone cottage hadn't brought her here to scare her. It had brought her here to confront her, to show her that grief isn't just about losing someone. It's about the words you never said while they were still there to hear them. And more importantly, it's about what you choose to do with that silence afterward. Scarlett wiped her tears slowly, her breathing steadying. Something inside her had shifted again. Not completely healed, but no longer broken in the same way. Because now, instead of running from her past, she was starting to face it. And that changed everything. She looked around the cottage one more time. But this time, she didn't see something eerie. She saw something honest, raw, human. This place wasn't filled with darkness. It was filled with everything people were too afraid to say out loud. And maybe that's why it felt so heavy. Scarlett stood up slowly, taking a deep breath. "I get it now," she whispered. The silence around her felt different this time. Not empty, not suffocating, but understanding. Because the truth was simple and impossible to ignore. You don't heal by forgetting. You heal by facing the one thing you've been avoiding the most. Scarlett stood in the center of the stone cottage, the silence around her no longer heavy but waiting. For days, she had thought about leaving, packing her things, walking away before the emotions buried in this place became too overwhelming to carry. But now, leaving didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like avoidance. And for the first time in a long time, Scarlett didn't want to run. The decision came quietly, not dramatic, not sudden, but certain. She wasn't going to sell the cottage. She wasn't going to abandon it like everyone else had. She was going to rebuild it. The work started the next morning. It was slow, exhausting, imperfect. Scarlett climbed onto the roof herself, replacing broken shingles one by one under the cold Vermont sky. Her hands blistered, her muscles ached, but with every piece she fixed, something inside her felt steadier. She cleaned the windows next, wiping away years of dust and grime until sunlight finally broke through, filling the cottage with a warmth it hadn't felt in decades. The fireplace, once silent and cold, came back to life as she carefully rebuilt it, stone by stone. The first fire she lit crackled softly, casting golden light across the room. For the first time, the house didn't feel abandoned. It felt alive. But the most important change happened below. In the cellar, the place where everything began, Scarlett returned there with a different purpose now. No longer searching for answers, but creating something new. She cleared the dust, organized the boxes, preserved the photographs. And at the center of the room, she placed a simple wooden table. On it, she laid out blank paper, pens, envelopes. A quiet invitation. At first, it was just for her. Scarlett sat down one evening, the soft glow of a lantern flickering beside her, and stared at the blank page in front of her. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from truth. For a long time, she couldn't write anything, because once she started, there would be no pretending anymore. Finally, she took a breath and began. Mom. The word alone broke something open inside her. Tears blurred her vision as the words poured out messy, unfiltered, real. The apology she never gave. The love she never fully expressed. The regret she had carried in silence. She didn't stop. Not until there was nothing left to say. When she finished, the room felt different. Lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because it was no longer trapped inside her. For the first time, she had said it. Scarlett folded the letter carefully and placed it inside one of the wooden boxes Eleanor had left behind. Not as a secret, but as a release. Days later, she made a simple decision. She opened the cottage. Not as a business, not as an attraction, but as a space. A place where people could come and say the things they never said. At first, no one came. Then one person did, an older man from a nearby town, quiet, hesitant. "I heard about this place," he said, standing awkwardly at the doorway. Scarlett simply nodded and stepped aside. No questions, no explanations. He walked into the cellar alone, stayed there for nearly an hour. When he came back up, his eyes were red, but his shoulders were lighter. "Thank you," he said softly before leaving. After that, more people came, not in crowds, but one by one. A woman who had lost her husband, a son who hadn't spoken to his father in years, a mother who carried guilt she couldn't let go of. They didn't come to explore the stone cottage. They didn't come for history. They came for something far more personal. They came to write, to cry, to remember, to forgive, to finally say the words they had buried for too long. Scarlett never interrupted. She never asked what they wrote, because she didn't need to. She already understood. Word began to spread, not through advertisements, but through stories. Stories of people who walked in carrying something heavy and walked out a little lighter. The stone cottage slowly became known not as a haunted place, but as a place where silence could finally be broken. One evening, Scarlett stood outside, watching the soft glow of light through the cottage windows. Voices murmured quietly inside, not loud, not chaotic, just human. She smiled faintly, because for the first time, she understood something that changed everything. This place had never been about the past. It had always been about what people do with it. Scarlett looked down at her hands once shaking, uncertain, lost. Now steady, grounded, alive. She hadn't just restored a house. She had created something far more powerful, a place where pain wasn't hidden, but transformed. And in doing so, she realized something she never expected. The stone cottage hadn't just healed her. It had given her purpose. Because sometimes, the greatest opportunity in life doesn't come from finding something new. It comes from facing what was already there and choosing to turn it into something meaningful. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a single moment, not one breakthrough, not one decision that changed everything at once. It came quietly, in small, almost invisible shifts, day by day. At first, Scarlett Monroe still carried the weight of her past like something fragile, something that could break her if she held it the wrong way. She moved carefully, spoke softly, kept parts of herself guarded. But the more time she spent inside the stone cottage, the more something unexpected began to happen. She stopped seeing pain as something to hide, and started seeing it as something that connected people. Every person who walked through the cottage door brought a different story, different faces, different lives, but the same expression in their eyes. Heavy, tired, holding something they didn't know how to release. Scarlett recognized it immediately, because she had seen that same look in the mirror. One afternoon, a middle-aged woman arrived, clutching an envelope so tightly it crumpled in her hands. "I don't know if this will help," the woman said quietly. Scarlett didn't interrupt. She just nodded, because she knew. It wasn't about knowing. It was about trying. An hour later, the woman came back up from the cellar. Her face was still wet with tears, but something had changed. The tension in her shoulders had softened. Her breathing was steadier. "I've been holding on to this for 20 years, she whispered. Scarlett met her eyes gently. "And today, you didn't have to carry it alone anymore." The woman nodded, unable to speak, and in that moment, Scarlett understood something deeper than she ever had before. She wasn't just someone who had survived loss. She had become someone who could hold space for it. That realization changed everything. Scarlett no longer saw herself as a victim of what had happened in her life. She saw herself as someone who had been shaped by it, refined by it, strengthened in ways she never would have chosen, but now understood, because grief didn't make her weak. It made her aware. It gave her a sensitivity to others that couldn't be taught, a quiet empathy that didn't need explanations. She didn't need to fix people. She didn't need to give advice. All she needed to do was be there. And somehow, that was enough. Each day, Scarlett stood near the entrance of the stone cottage, watching strangers arrive with hesitation in their steps and leave with something lighter in their eyes. Not completely healed, but changed, shifted, one step closer to peace. And every time she saw that, she was reminded of something powerful. Her pain had not been meaningless. It had built something real, something that mattered. But the most important moment came when Scarlett finally did something she had been avoiding. Even after everything she had learned, she went back down to the cellar. Not for someone else, but for herself. The room was quiet, just as it had always been. The wooden table still stood at the center, blank paper waiting. Scarlett sat down slowly, her hands resting on the surface. For a long moment, she didn't move, because this time, it felt different, heavier, more personal than anything before. She reached for a pen. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from truth. Then, she began to write. Mom. The word alone hit harder than anything else. Her breath caught as emotions she had buried for so long rose to the surface again. But this time she didn't push them away. I'm sorry. The words came slowly at first, then faster, more honest, more open than she had ever allowed herself to be. She didn't just apologize. She remembered. The way her mother used to laugh in the kitchen, the warmth of her hand resting on Scarlett's shoulder, the quiet moments that once felt ordinary, but now meant everything. I miss you, she wrote. Her vision blurred as tears fell onto the page. But I think I finally understand something now. Her hand paused for a moment, then continued. Love doesn't end just because we didn't get the last moment right. The sentence sat there, heavy with meaning. True, in a way she hadn't been able to accept before. I thought I lost my chance forever, she wrote. But maybe love doesn't work like that. Her breathing steadied as something inside her began to shift again. Not breaking this time, but healing. Maybe what we didn't get to say. We can still carry in the way we live. Scarlett put the pen down slowly. Her chest rose and fell deeply, but for the first time, it didn't feel tight. She folded the letter carefully, holding it for a moment before placing it into the wooden box with the others, not as something unfinished, but as something finally expressed. When she stood up, the room felt different. Not empty, not heavy, but complete. Scarlett walked back upstairs, the soft light of the cottage wrapping around her as she stepped into the living space. She paused for a moment, looking around, at the walls, at the windows, at the life that had slowly returned to this place. And then she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she was no longer running. She had faced her past. She had spoken the words she thought she never would. And in doing so, she had become something she never expected. Not just someone who survived pain, but someone who could guide others through it. Because sometimes, the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break, and choose to rebuild in a way that helps others do the same. A year later, the stone cottage no longer felt like a place people avoided. It became a place people searched for, not because it was famous, not because it was advertised, but because something about it spread quietly, through stories, through whispers, through people who left and told others. There's a place where you can finally let it go. It wasn't loud. There were no crowds lining up outside, no signs pointing the way, no grand openings or announcements. And yet, people kept coming, one by one, each carrying something invisible, a memory, a regret, a sentence left unfinished. Some stayed for an hour, some for an entire day. Some didn't even speak when they arrived, but almost all of them left differently than they came. Not completely healed, but lighter, as if something inside them had finally been heard, even if no one else read their words. Inside the cellar, the wooden boxes had multiplied, each one holding letters from strangers who had trusted the space enough to be honest. Scarlett never opened them. She never needed to, because she understood something most people didn't. It wasn't about who read the words. It was about finally saying them. On the stone wall at the center of the cellar, Scarlett had carved a single sentence. Simple, quiet, but powerful enough to stop people in their tracks. Some doors do not open to the past, they open to healing. People would stand there, reading it over and over again, sometimes with tears, sometimes with relief. Because for many of them, that sentence said everything they had never been able to put into words. And then, there was Scarlett, standing at the center of it all, not as the owner, not as a guide, but as someone who had once needed this place just as much as anyone else. On the anniversary of her mother's passing, Scarlett woke up before sunrise. The air outside was still, quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make her uncomfortable. But now, it felt different, peaceful. She walked slowly into the living room, her steps soft against the wooden floor. Her eyes moved instinctively toward the fireplace, the same place where it had all begun, where the knocking once echoed through the walls at exactly 2:17 a.m., where fear first took hold of her. She checked the clock. 2:16 a.m. Her breath slowed. For a moment, her heart tightened. Not from fear, but from memory. 2:17. The second passed. Then another. Silence. No knocking. No sound. Nothing. Scarlett stood there, completely still, waiting, listening, but the house remained quiet. Not empty, but calm. And in that silence, something inside her finally settled, because she understood now. The knocking had never been about the house. It had never been something outside of her. It was something within her, a part of her that had been trying to speak, trying to be heard, trying to say the words she had buried for far too long. And now, there was nothing left to say. Scarlett closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. No fear, no tension, no weight pressing against her chest. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel stuck in the past, because the truth was simple and freeing. Sometimes what haunts us isn't the past itself. It's the fact that we never allowed ourselves to make peace with it. Scarlett opened her eyes slowly, a quiet understanding settling over her. The stone cottage hadn't saved her, not in the way stories usually describe. There had been no miracle, no sudden change, no magical moment that erased everything. Instead, it had done something far more powerful. It forced her to face the truth she had been avoiding, to sit with it, to feel it, to stop running from it. And in doing so, it gave her something she didn't even realize she had lost. Herself. She walked closer to the fireplace, resting her hand gently against the cold stone wall. The same wall that once felt like a barrier, now felt steady, grounded. "I understand now," she whispered softly. Not to the house, not to the past, but to herself. Behind her, the cottage stood quiet but alive, filled with stories, with truth, with people who had come searching for something they couldn't name, and left with something they didn't expect: healing. Scarlett turned toward the window as the first light of dawn began to break over the mountains. Soft, golden. A new day. And for the first time, she wasn't carrying the past with her. She was walking forward, with it finally at peace behind her. 'Cause sometimes, the thing that changes your life isn't what you find. It's what you finally face. Scarlett Monroe's story reminds us of something deeply human. In life, everyone carries their own version of a stone cottage. It might be a memory you keep avoiding, a phone call you never made, an apology you never said, someone you lost but never truly let go of, or even a version of yourself you've tried to bury and forget. We often believe healing comes from moving on, from staying busy, changing places, or pretending the past no longer matters. But the truth is, healing doesn't come from forgetting. It begins the moment you find the courage to turn back, open that door, and say, "I'm ready to face this." Because what we avoid doesn't disappear. It waits, quietly, patiently. And sometimes, it calls us back when we're finally ready to listen. The deeper message of this story is simple yet powerful. You don't need a perfect life to begin again. Sometimes, the most broken parts of your story, the regret, the loss, the pain, are exactly where the light begins to enter. If this story touched you, take a moment today to reach out, to write that message, or to say the words you've been holding back. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need it.